watching? Tell me who's watching? Who's watching me? I'm just an average man with an average life. I work from 9 to 5. Hey, hell, I pay the price. All I want is to be left alone in my average home. But why do I always feel like I'm in the twilight zone? And I always feel like somebody's watching me, and I have no privacy. Oh, I always feel like somebody's watching me. Tell me, is it just a dream? Oh.
Good evening and welcome to Beholding the Truth. I am your humble host, Joshua. I have a very fun episode planned for us today. We're going to get into the latest psychological operation that the government is portraying as truth to the people who don't know any better, people who don't know how the government actually functions in terms of what's happening behind the scenes with blackmail and what's happening behind the scenes with financial manipulation, nor do they understand how the government's budget is constructed, where the money comes from and where it goes. We're going to talk through all of that. And this is pertinent to Donald Trump's announcement last night that this is somewhat of a implication that he laid out for us, that he was considering abolishing the federal income tax, which has, to be expected, all conservatives jizzing their pants and being overly enthusiastic on the social media platforms, talking about how this is going to get his face erected on Mount Rushmore. So hopefully none of you guys are falling for this, because it's not going to happen. And I posted a few stories about this on my Instagram last night within 30 seconds of seeing it, telling you guys, put it back in your pants. It's not going to happen. But I wanted to go a little bit deeper and explain some of the most obvious reasons why it's not going to happen, and then explain why, even if it were to happen, it's not going to introduce the golden or gilded age that Donald Trump is proposing that America is about to sail off into the sunset into. So let's get into it. Where to begin? First and foremost, the federal income tax was established in 1913 via a constitutional amendment, the 16th Amendment. When Donald Trump says that, and he didn't say this in explicit terms, he simply said that America didn't have an income tax up until 1913, and up until then, America's primary source of revenue was through tariffs, aka taxing foreign imports. Whenever a country wants to sell their goods to American citizens, they had to pay some kind of tax on that. And that was the majority of the American government's income. 1913 comes along, they institute the 16th Amendment, including the introduction of a federal income tax, which gives the government the authority to seize from your paycheck, at that time, 1, 2, maybe 3% of your income. Not a big deal, guys. It's 1 or 2%. Come on, don't be stingy. And then fast forward 100 years, here I am losing 25 to 30% of my income to federal taxes alone. All said and done, I lose 35 to 40% of my income through gimmies. So, and I know many of you are in the same bucket, or your parents are in the same bucket, or you will be in the same bucket once your career scales to being in a higher income bracket. And even if you're not in a high income bracket, you're still probably shelling out 15% or more of your income to the federal government. Now, as I said, 1913 was the beginning of this shit show, and it was rolled out through a constitutional amendment. That's what you have to do in order to give the government an ongoing authority to do something like this. Now, trying to undo such a change, trying to undo a constitutional amendment, is not something that can be achieved simply through executive order. Like when Donald Trump a week ago said, we're going to re-implement Remain in Mexico via executive order. That's simply saying the president can do this without having to pass through Congress, without having to get a majority vote, any of that stuff. There are some things he can do to do that. Repealing a constitutional amendment is not one of them. And this is actually exactly what's going to happen with the other proposal that Donald Trump suggested in regards to immigration, which was ending birthright citizenship. if you were following that story, he made this big hoopla about, and we're going to end birthright citizenship. And guess what? Within 10 minutes, every liberal media outlet and people who actually know how the government works said, you can't actually do that because that's protected by the Constitution that says anybody born on U.S. soil is automatically a United States citizen. And it's a poorly worded part of the Constitution. It wasn't meant to imply that anybody can come illegally into our country, pop out a baby, and boom, they're a permanent citizen of our country. That's not why that part of the Constitution is there. It was in regards to slavery and slaves being freed, and because they were born in America by default, once they were free, they should be United States citizens. That's why that part of the Constitution is there. But that is now misapplied toward illegal immigrants and their anchor babies. And this is the defense that the liberal progressive agenda uses to say that, hey, per the Constitution, sorry, if you want to undo birthright citizenship, you're going to have a constitutional amendment. You can't do that through executive order. Okay, well, the same thing applies for the federal income tax. It was introduced and implemented through a constitutional amendment, the 16th Amendment. And so if Donald Trump wants to undo the existence of a federal income tax, it's going to have to go through Congress. So that then puts you into the conversation of, is it an actual probability? Is there any likelihood that such a proposal would pass through Congress with the majority? Would enough Congress members vote yes on abolishing the federal income tax? Well, the Congress doesn't operate based on what do the people of the United States of America want. What are our voters telling us that they want? They operate primarily based on how they are being blackmailed financially, reputationally, politically, and fatally. So whenever a unpopular to the powers that be suggestion comes along in Congress, whether it's getting rid of foreign aid or not involving ourselves in wars and so on, even though that's what the people want and those Congress members are supposed to be representing the desires of the people, we still fail to pass those movements or legislations through Congress because those senators and Congress members are beholden to the financial lobbyists who paid for their political campaigns to get elected. And they are beholden to the people who are blackmailing them with sex tapes and other types of illicit material, to where that if they even were to vote in contradiction to the powers that be, their lives would be destroyed. And one of the most recent examples of this was Thomas Massey when he went on Tucker Carlson's podcast last year, and he just dropped the bombshell pretty casually that every member in the House, especially on the Republican side, has an Israeli handler, a babysitter.
Everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What does that mean, an AIPAC person?
It's like your babysitter, your AIPAC babysitter, who is always talking to you for AIPAC. They're probably a constituent in your district, but they are, firmly embedded in AIPAC. They come to DC, you go have lunch with them, and they've got your cell number, and you have conversations with them. So I've had
that's absolutely crazy.
I've had 4 members of Congress say, "I'll talk to my AIPAC person," and it's literally what we call them, my AIPAC guy. I'll talk to my AIPAC guy and see if I can get him to, dial those ads back.
Why have I never heard this before?
It doesn't benefit anybody. Why would they want to tell their constituents that they've basically got a buddy system with somebody who's representing a foreign country? It doesn't benefit the congressman for people to know that, so they're not going to tell you that.
Have you seen any other country do anything like this? Like
no.
Russia obviously determines the outcome of our elections. We keep hearing that. Does anyone have a Putin guy that they talk to?
Not only do they not have a Putin guy, look, they don't have a Britain guy. They don't have an Australian guy. They don't have a Germany dude. Like, it's the only country that does this.
1 month later, his wife mysteriously dies. And I did an entire feature-length documentary about this that also traces back this pattern to JFK and RFK and others who have been outspoken criticizing Israel and then having tragedies in their family. So the subject of blackmail and how it limits the employment of the people's will in Congress is real, no pun intended, and that is the primary limiting factor in terms of would this actually get through Congress? No, it wouldn't. Part of it is also simple math in that you have to have a majority, and keep in mind, almost half of Congress is Democrats, okay? So Democrats, by definition of their party, are socialists. They do believe in income redistribution. They want a socialist country. They want to take money out of your pocket and pay for food stamps and healthcare and unemployment and other kinds of social welfare programs. So the Democrats, not even having to be blackmailed, are going to vote no on abolishing the federal income tax, because the federal income tax, we're going to get into how many actual dollars it represents and what percentage of the entire government's budget it represents. They wouldn't allow this to pass in the first place. So they're automatically going to vote no. And so most of the Congress is going to vote no on this. And then the few who aren't voting no out of principle because they want socialism are going to vote no because they're being blackmailed. So, and that were, even if, as I said, this could be done through purely democratic means, it would have to go through Congress. It won't survive. So that's the most obvious take to me. But there's something else that I want to get into about, let's just say if we were to entertain fantasy land where the Democrats said, you know what, I actually don't like losing 25% of my income. And hey, I'm a compassionate person, but I do have a family of my own, and I want to make sure my children and my grandchildren are taken care of, and I'm having a hard time myself. And so maybe Donald Trump is onto something with this whole, let's replace the revenue stream of federal income tax with tariffs. Let's make other countries pay for all these welfare programs. Maybe, let's just say in some fantasy land that actually happened, and that the entire Congress weren't being blackmailed and put in place because they could be blackmailed. Let's just say that those things happened. They got the majority vote. They survived the blackmail attempts. They abolished the 16th Amendment. Awesome. Federal income tax is gone. You and I don't have to pay that. That's a good thing, right? Well, would that actually mean America sails off into a golden age? Would that solve our debt crisis? Would that fix the federal budget? Would we somehow be able to actually afford the entitlements that are stacked up so high now that our country is insolvent? Well, let's look at the numbers. I have those numbers, and unfortunately, you're going to be pretty disappointed in terms of what would the actual impact be of employing the number that's being floated around by Donald Trump is a tariff, a flat tariff, so not specific per type of good, but just every country, all goods. The number that's being floated is something like 15%, maybe 10%, but let's just say on the high end, 15%. How much money would taxing all imports of all goods, no matter what industry, no matter what country they're coming from, ally or foe or whoever else, how much money would that bring into the United States government per year? Well, that information is easily accessible. You can go to Google and type in total United States imports per year. All right, and you're going to find out that's monthly. United States, how much does the U.S. import in total? United States goods imports from the world totaled $3.2 trillion in 2022. And a lot of these numbers we're going to go through vary from 2022 to 23. Some of them are 2024, but from year to year, they only vary single-digit percentages, like 2, 3, 4%. So you can just use a ballpark figure of somewhere around $3 trillion, something like that. And so if America said, all right, we're allowing $3 trillion worth of goods to be sold in our country tax-free or tariff-free. We're not asking for any kind of slice of that pie from all these countries. Donald Trump is in charge, and now that we're in the golden age, we're going to take 10%, maybe even 15%. Okay, well, if you're good at math, you don't have to have a Columbia degree in economics or supply chain or calculus to figure out that 10% of 3 trillion is 300 billion. If it were 15%, you'd be talking about 450 billion, sorry. So we'll just use 10% because the math is easy to understand. So let's say we started suddenly getting $300 billion in additional federal revenue coming into our coffers every year. Would that dramatically change the financial situation of America? Well, in order to understand that, you have to look at our budget and how much money we are spending. And yep, that information is pretty easily obtainable as well. So keep in mind, the number we're talking about here is $300 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, right? Well, guess what? In Social Security alone, the Social Security program cost the federal government $1.3 trillion. So we wouldn't even have enough to offset 25% of the cost of one program. Then you get into the cost of subsidized health care, Medicare and Medicaid. Guess how much that is? Another $1.5 trillion. It wouldn't even pay for half of just Medicaid, whereas Medicare is another $840 billion. Medicaid is $616 billion. All right, well, what about some other expenses that the federal government has in the hundreds of billions of dollars? Income security programs. So this is stuff like earned income tax credit, supplemental nutritional assistance, unemployment compensation, child nutrition programs, food stamps, welfare, and so on. Well, that's $448 billion. Okay, so sum total, the government's budget every year, the amount of money that we spend is $6 trillion. And you're talking about bringing in 300 billion incremental dollars and implying that this is going to radically change the financial situation of America. It's not. As I said, it wouldn't even pay for half of one of these welfare programs. What they call mandatory programs, by the way. The budget is divided into mandatory, discretionary, and then our interest spending. By the way, the interest on the debt that America has borrowed from other countries is more than double what this additional income from tariffs would bring in. The interest payments alone on our debt are $659 billion per year. And we're going to bring in $300 billion with tariffs. And you think this is going to dramatically change the economy of the United States of America? No, we will still be not only in a deficit, but still in a deep, deep deficit every year and growing. And the debt will continue to grow. So, sad to say it, guys, but it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. And even if it did happen, it's not going to dramatically change the financial climate of the country. What would actually change the financial situation in America is doing something about all of these mandatory spending programs, all of the also called entitlements, the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the socialist system that has been slowly built up over decades, over a century now. The only way to fix our deficit is to unwind some of those programs. And those are the least popular to the people things to do. It's very popular to say, hey, what if we abolish the federal income tax? Everybody assumes that means, oh man, I get a 10, 20, 30% raise every year. That sounds great. What's not so popular is to say, to actually fix the financial budget of America, we have to do something about the ongoing cost of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and all these other income security programs. We can't keep handing out money like candy. And that's not going to happen. Nobody wants to unwind Social Security because everybody is already invested in Social Security. Everybody has already paid in. And so they're expecting to get, they already concede that they're not going to get all of the money they put in out. If you've actually run the numbers on somebody who works for 50 years, and then what they'll actually receive in payments from the age of 67 through 87 when they die, you're going to get like maybe 10, maybe 20% back of what you paid into Social Security, if you're lucky. And that's assuming you weren't in a high income bracket, that you were just a middle class average American. People constantly complain about the cost of healthcare in America, and for legitimate reasons. The whole healthcare system is busted. Part of it is because it is subsidized by the government, and that allows these healthcare costs to soar because the providers know that they can ask for higher numbers because the federal government's going to foot the bill. But the problem is the federal government doesn't foot the bill because the federal government doesn't create that money. We create that money. We produce through our jobs, through our labor, and then we entrust the government with that money. So to roll back Medicare to the tune of $840 billion a year, or Medicaid at $616 billion a year, combined, you're talking about $1.5 trillion worth of health care alone that we give to the government to try to solve the cost of health care, and we still have the highest health care in the world. So do you think going out there with a proposal that says, hey, we're going to have to make healthcare more expensive because the government's going to stop subsidizing it? How do you think that's going to go? So that's not going anywhere. And Social Security is not going anywhere. I haven't even got into military spending, by the way. Defense spending is $800 billion a year. The money that we have to pay to defend ourselves by going to war in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, soon to be Iran, Russia, Ukraine. That costs us $800 billion a year earmarked. But then when you actually look at, this is just like what's built into the budget. Then when you look at the one-time spending of, well, what did we actually pay to Ukraine in these sudden spikes of spending due to world events, that number climbs exponentially. So the problem is the government is spending too much money. The people trust the government with too much money. Until that changes, this is all just talk. It's all just public relations. Another word for this that's thrown around is called red meat. So when Donald Trump goes on whatever news platform, social media or legacy media, and says any number of things such as, yeah, we're going to have mass deportations, millions and millions of people are going to get out of here, and we're going to end birthright citizenship, and we're going to abolish the federal income tax. All this stuff gives conservatives a hard on. It makes them think Trump is like the most base president in the entire history of their lifetime, possibly ever. And they glorify the man as a living God, and they want to erect statues and put tattoos on themselves of him. And it feels so good and gratifying because they voted for him. And they said, yep, this validates my vote. Look how smart I am. I voted for the guy who said he's going to do mass deportations and end birthright citizenship, and he's going to abolish the federal income tax. And he officially proclaimed the United States policy on gender is that there are only two. I feel so good that I voted for this guy. Look how smart I am. I am part of the solution. I am changing America. This is unfortunately part of the problem with democracy, where humans have an innate need to feel important, and we have an innate need to feel heard. We want our opinions to be heard by others at a minimum, and preferably agreed with by others and followed. And so democracy as a governmental model theoretically provides that. It says, yes, you as an individual have a voice, and that voice can change the country. And that's another thing that just gives everybody a hard on. They're like, yes, that's why we have to protect democracy, no matter what. The problem is people with awful ideologies, people with antichrist worldviews, people with communist worldviews, well, their vote is equal to yours too. And so you're not getting a hard on about that, are you? When somebody says, actually, I think abortion is a healthcare issue and women's rights, and that's why the federal government has to protect the right to murder your child. Yeah, suddenly democracy doesn't work anymore, does it? And when they say, hey, we're a country of religious openness, and the federal government has to be separated from any kind of religious affiliation. And so if I want to erect a statue to Satan, in a public building, in a school, if I want to teach Satanism at the library, hey, I'm allowed to do that, okay? Because my voice matters too. This is a democracy. And if I want to produce and proliferate and profit off of pornography, hey, my voice matters too. These are the amazing benefits of democracy. So it's tough. It's a hard thing for people to swallow, especially boomers who were indoctrinated with many false beliefs, racial color blindness, religious tolerance, and democracy is sacred, and the moon landing, and so on. These are such deeply held beliefs, and specifically today we're talking about the idea that democracy is inherently the best governmental model because every individual citizen has a equal voice. It's pretty sinister because it strokes the ego of everybody. And that's not really what the purpose of government is. The government doesn't exist to stroke your ego. The government exists to protect the people. That's it. There's no more to it than that. And you don't protect the people by stealing from them, right? You don't say, I think that we need to reach into your pocket, the money that you have earned through your labor, your hours invested, and give them to somebody else who is not putting forth the same work ethic, who's not even from this country, who doesn't care about the ancestors of our country, who would prefer our country speak a different language, who would prefer we celebrate a different set of holidays, so on and so forth. I think it's legitimate to reach into your pocket, take your money, and give it to them. That's not the role of the government. That's not why a government should exist. Okay. So democracy is failing in real time, and it has been failing for quite a long time. It's flat out in principle, it doesn't work. This is why something more like a monarchy, where accountability is clearly held by one person and they can be ousted by the people if that person is not representing their will, is probably a better solution long term. And that's why so many governments throughout history have trusted that model and prospered under that model. But hey, here we are. Democracy is sacred. So long as we have a racially colorblind meritocracy, everything will work out fine. If you want to worship Satan, but you're a hard worker, we equally value your contributions to society, and we will protect you and your right to worship Satan. So, as explained, first and foremost, it has to go through Congress. Any possibility of the federal income tax being eliminated, Trump cannot do alone. It's going to require the support of Congress. Congress won't allow to pass this with the majority. Part one is because there's a very large portion of Congress that are Democrats. And by virtue of being Democrats, they want to protect income redistribution. And enough Republicans, including the Democrats as well, but enough Republicans are being blackmailed by people that we don't even have to bring up, but you know who I'm talking about, that they would vote no on this proposition, and they would float the same kind of ideas of, well, I think these social programs do have to be funded, and the tariffs would only bring in $300 billion a year, and that's just not enough. If you're confused about why those tariffs just aren't enough, individual income taxes bring in $2 trillion a year. Okay, total revenues for the entire government are only $4.4 trillion. So half of the entire government's income comes from individual income taxes. So you can't say we're going to take $300 billion of incremental new revenue from tariffs, and that's going to fill the whole of $2.2 trillion of individual income taxes. It just doesn't work. The math doesn't math. The government would need either dramatically less spending or dramatically more funding somehow. So, and government funding doesn't come from anywhere other than taxes, individual income taxes, payroll taxes, and corporate income taxes. Those three together represent 4.2, I'm sorry, what's that? That's 2 trillion, 4.2 trillion of the $4.4 trillion that the government has to spend come from taxes. And the biggest slice of that is individual income taxes. Right now, currently, tariffs and other kind of taxation of foreign bodies represents like $200 billion. So we already get a little bit from, what is this? Includes collections of custom duties, excise taxes, estate and gift taxes, miscellaneous fees and fines, and remittances from the Federal Reserve. So, as I said, you can't substitute $2.2 trillion, half of the entire government's federal income, with $300 billion, maybe $400 billion worth of tariffs. That wouldn't solve our federal government's deficit. Our ratio of spending to income is nowhere near solved with that Band-Aid. The one thing that I haven't mentioned yet that I've actually done an entire mini documentary about is the nature of taxes not just existing to fund these social welfare programs in the military-industrial complex. I did a documentary called America and Israel: Life in 1984. It's like a 15-minute mini documentary, and it talks about one of the many themes of 1984. Everybody knows about censorship, thought police, doublethink, historical revisionism, all that stuff, Big Brother. That's all pretty well known about 1984, but a lot of people forget that one of the key themes of that book also talks about the role of taxes and how they're directly connected to the military-industrial complex, and how the purpose of perpetual taxation is to deplete the wealth of the proletariat, people like you and me, the worker bees, aka the proles. They being the government, cannot allow the population to accumulate wealth to the extent that they would no longer need the government to help them with their health care, to give them food stamps, to give them unemployment. They have enough money in the bank that those problems can be solved by their own income or by their loved ones, family members contributing, coming together, paying for things themselves. Just imagine if you didn't pay federal income taxes your entire life and you weren't paying state income taxes your entire life, then you would have dramatically more money. You'd probably have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not even millions of dollars in the bank right now. Millions of families throughout the country would have millions of dollars in the bank right now if taxes didn't exist, meaning they would not need the government for all of these various programs. Nor would the government have access to all of that money to do the things overseas that they want to do, such as fulfill Israel's Greater Israel Project and go to war in more than half a dozen countries in the Middle East, do all these regime changes. And so it's not just a matter of this isn't going to happen because of blackmail. It's not going to happen because you can't get the majority because half the government's socialist anyway. It's also not going to happen because philosophically, the government exists to ensure that the people cannot overthrow it. It is a self-surviving organism. It exists to protect itself first and then serve the people with what's left over. It's not supposed to be that way, but I'm explaining how it actually is. And so if you said, yeah, sorry, government, we're taking half of your entire financial resources, do you think the government's going to fight back? Yeah, I think so. I think the government wants you dependent on them. They want you beholden to them. They love hanging over your head the reminder that says, hey, April 14th or whatever it is coming up. Reminder, if you don't give us 20% of your income, 30% of your income, whatever, you're going to jail. Do you think they're actually going to surrender that trump card? You don't think the government likes having power over all 350 million Americans that says, if you don't pay us, you go to jail? Come on, guys. Think it through. This is never going to happen. Pick one of the reasons I mentioned. Half the government being socialist, the blackmail that exists, the power that they must preserve over you. the desire to go to wars for the people who have subverted our government for over 100 years. Those wars are paid for by what? It's not going to happen, guys. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to burst the bubble. There's a lot of excitement. I'll just give you some of the retards that are falling for this right now. Yeah, just do a quick Twitter feed scroll here. You got Colin Rugg. Just in, President Trump appears to call for the end of the federal income tax, says it's time America returns to the system that made us richer. Matt Walsh, totally based Matt Walsh. If he ends the income tax system, he will unquestionably deserve to be added to Mount Rushmore. These are just like the most surface level, kind of observations you can ever make. Elon Musk, do you support eliminating the income tax? I'm sorry, that's the Elon Musk parody account. He's not actually weighing in on this. DC Drano, who is Jewish, first he enacts the tariffs, then he builds external revenue service to pile up foreign money. Then he warms people up with no tax on tips and social security checks. Then, once the foreign tariff coffers get filled, he abolishes all federal income tax. A perfect switch, said by somebody who clearly hasn't looked at the numbers and figured out that the government's not going to surrender half of its income and its trump card of being able to throw anybody in jail who doesn't pay up. So last night I saw Owen Benjamin, who is usually spot on with being able to spot psychological operations and remind everybody of what's actually going on and the implausibility of anything meaningful ever happening that would be good for the people widespread. He's over there talking about, holy shit, can you believe this is happening? This is going to be so awesome if it actually happens. You got the Hodge twins. Oh boy, yeah, we need the Hodge twins' opinions. Sovereign Bra, if Trump eliminates federal income taxes, he will go down as the greatest president in modern America history. How many people do we need to say the same thing? It's a theoretical, no shit statement. Hey, what if Trump closed the border and ended immigration and gave us all a 20% raise and banned abortion and banned gay marriage and landed on the moon and he would be the best president ever. Okay, well, fill up your bingo card with delusional fantasies all you want. None of that shit's going to happen. We're not landing on Mars. We're going to continue to get immigrants that replace the native population because we have a negative birth rate of the heritage Americans. We're going to continue going to war for Israel. We're going to continue to pay income taxes for the rest of our lives. It is what it is. So you heard it here first. None of this is going to happen. I explained very clearly and logically why it's not going to happen. It's not going to make it through Congress. Even if it did make it through Congress, it wouldn't make a meaningful difference in America's economy. So I hate to be a black pill kind of guy, but the name of my platform is Beholden the Truth. I have to tell you guys the truth about these things. So there it is. I hope you guys don't take the news too harshly. Hopefully, when your boomer parents call you up this weekend and say, "Did you hear?" you don't go and shit on and rain on their parade and ruin your family relationships. You just say what these idiots on Twitter are saying. That would be awesome. Yeah, that would be awesome. That will wrap it up for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll talk to you again soon. Until next time, God bless and Christ is King.